Welcome subscribers and viewers new and old to Tales from the Hangman's Record. In this series we look back at some infamous and little known murder cases that took place in Great Britain and Ireland between the years 1868 and 1964 and which feature in my 3-volume hardback book series The Hangman's Record. Copies of these are available from my website stevefielding.com. I'm extremely grateful that in recent months a number of people have asked if they can help support the channel financially. I have so far resisted running sponsored adverts, but if anyone wishes to help in some small way to offset the cost of making these videos, any donations are greatly appreciated. You can use either of the links buymeacoffee.com/thehangmansrecord or paypal.me/thehangmansrecord. Thank you. If you enjoyed this presentation, please give it a like, and if you don't already, can I ask you to subscribe? And as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case and for suggestions for further episodes. Today's episode of Tales of the Hangman's Record features another wartime case. Although America had been supporting the Allies since the outbreak of the Second World War, it wasn't until December 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, that she declared war on Japan, which in turn led, a few days later, to Germany and her allies responding by declaring war on the USA. By early 1942, the first American units had landed in Northern Ireland, soon to be followed by tens of thousands more American and Canadian troops stationed throughout Great Britain in readiness for the planned invasion. The subject of this episode was a Canadian soldier. With no previous convictions at home, following his posting to the south of England, he was to find that drink, being starved of female company, and the tension of the impending combat were to have fatal consequences. In episode 54 of Tales from the Hangman's Record, we looked at the case of Ernie Kemp, hanged on D-Day 1944 for the murder of a leading aircraft woman in South London. Controversially, as we saw, Kemp is still listed on the memorial at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey, commemorating soldiers who gave their lives fighting for their country in the Second World War, and recorded as being without a known final resting place. But we know Kemp does indeed have a grave. He lies in a special plot beside other executed felons in London's Wandsworth jail. And, like Kemp, protagonist in this case shares not only a thoroughly unwarranted mention on the Brookwood War Memorial, but an adjacent unmarked grave in the same unconsecrated ground behind those same grim high prison walls. It looked at first sight as if it was a road accident. The narrow lanes around the peaceful countryside of West Sussex on the south coast of England, with high hedgerows and no street lighting, had, in recent months, seen a number of incidents of fatalities, especially at night during the wartime blackout. It was shortly after midday on Sunday, January the 31st, 1943, when 2 members of the local Home Guard were cycling towards Chichester from Holnaker, a small village some 4 miles away. As the men made their way down the quiet lane close to Goodwood Race Circuit, they spotted what appeared to be a body lying in a hedge beside the field. Resting their bicycles against a flint wall, they went to take a closer look and could see it was that of a young woman. She was dressed in the uniform of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and although she was clearly severely injured from what appeared to be head injuries, she was still alive. Judging by the wet state of her clothes, it appeared she had been there several hours, and as there had been a thunderstorm the previous night, she would have suffered from exposure to the elements. One of the men waited beside the body, while the other cycled to the Richmond Arms pub in nearby Waterbeach to call an ambulance and get help from any army medics amongst the soldiers stationed there. An ambulance took the injured woman to the Royal West Sussex Hospital in Chichester, where, soon after her arrival, 2 detectives from the West Sussex Constabulary arrived. Doctors found she was in a bad way with serious head injuries, and when, later that afternoon, her condition began to deteriorate, surgeons decided to operate in a desperate attempt to save her life. She was rushed into theatre, but later that evening, during an operation lasting over 6 hours, she died on the operating table, having never regained consciousness. It was whilst in hospital the full horror of the injuries inflicted came to light. Resident pathologist Dr. Charles Warwick believed she'd been battered about the head before being subjected to a sexual assault. Detectives have been quickly able to confirm the woman's identity as Marguerite Beatrice Burge, a 22-year-old member of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Marguerite was the adopted daughter of Thomas and Ada Wellman from Bedhampton Havant, 10 miles west of Chichester in Hampshire. On hearing the news of her injuries, they rushed to her bedside and were beside her when she passed away that evening. Thomas Wellman told the police they had brought the girl up from when she was just 2 years old, and that their daughter's natural mother was French and her father a London-born farmer. She had been working in a hairdressing salon in Havant after leaving school and had enlisted into the WAF in 1940. He said that as far as he knew, her daughter did not have a regular boyfriend and had just celebrated her 22nd birthday a week earlier. Although officers from West Sussex Constabulary had initially taken charge of the murder investigation, Scotland Yard were immediately called in to assist. In the early hours of Monday morning, Detective Chief Inspector Tom Barrett and his assistant arrived in Chichester, and later that afternoon, along with Superintendent Ernie Savage of the local police, they attended the dead girl's inquest in Chichester. They learned that Marguerite had been based at RAF Tangmere, only 2 miles from where the body had been found. The 2 men from the Home Guard told of finding the stricken woman. They said the body was lying on its left side. Her clothes did not appear to have been ruffled except one stocking had been rolled down to her shoe. A short distance from the body was a WAF hat and a notebook, which appeared to have been used as a diary. The men added that none of the girl's head injuries were bleeding, and they assumed from the sodden condition of her uniform she had been in the field overnight. Dr. Warwick told the court that Marguerite had died on the operating table from intracerebral hemorrhage, a severe blow to the head caused by some form of blunt instrument, and estimated that when she was found she had been in the field for several hours. Such was the severity of the injuries, he said that she must have been attacked where she was found, or the body left there, as the attack would have left her unable to walk. On the following day, detectives got their first major lead. Door-to-door inquiries led officers to interview 2 young boys who lived in a cottage on a lane close to where the body was found. They said that around 3:45 on the Saturday afternoon, they had been watching a pheasant shoot when they spotted a young woman in a WAF uniform. They saw her walking along the road to Waterbeach when an Army Chevrolet truck pulled up and the girl appeared to be talking to the driver. She then climbed into the truck, and moments later it passed the lane where they lived, and they could clearly see the girl in the passenger seat. The truck then travelled about 100 yards down the road when it stopped. The engine cut out and it remained there for about 10 minutes. Then the engine started up and it accelerated away towards Waterbeach. It seems likely either Marguerite had asked for a lift and had then been attacked, or she knew the driver and had agreed to meet him on the lane. Another local man reported seeing the army truck near to where the body had been found at around 4:30, and with the driver acting suspiciously. The man had passed by on foot and at first thought the truck had broken down. As he approached the cab, the soldier walked briskly to the back, and then reappeared with what seemed to be a folder he was using to hide his face. He then jumped into the cab and drove off. The 4th person to tell the police they had seen an army truck was a farmer who said he'd been working in a field that the body was found at around 4 o'clock just before darkness fell. The farmer said he had seen the truck parked up at the side of the road for about 15 minutes. In his account, he said the man walked to the back of the truck, returned to the cab and then drove off, but more importantly, he was able to say the truck had stopped at the gap in the edge, the exact same spot where Marguerite had been discovered on the following day. The police were now convinced that Marguerite Burge's murderer was a truck driver, and the hunt for the killer stepped up. On Saturday, February the 6th, just 1 week after her brutal murder, Marguerite was laid to rest at St Thomas's Church, Bedhampton. 50 members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force and 2 officers formed a guard of honour. 6 RAF sergeants carried the coffin, draped with the Union Jack flag, into the church. Her body was then interred at Havant Cemetery. Interviewing staff at RAF Tangmere, detectives spoke to one of Marguerite's closest friends, who gave them an explanation of why she was on the road that afternoon, and also the name of a potential suspect. She said Marguerite had left Tangmere at around 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, as she had a date with an army sergeant, and they intended to spend the day in Bognor Regis. The soldier, Stanley Clark, a PT instructor, was quickly located and confirmed this, telling detectives they had arranged to meet at Boxgrove Corner on the Holnacker to Waterbeach Road. He said he had arrived at 2:35 and waited for about a quarter of an hour. Sergeant Clark said he wouldn't describe Marguerite as his girlfriend, as he only met a few days before, but when she failed to make the rendezvous, he simply assumed she had changed her mind and blown him out. The next lead came from another airman at RAF Tangmere. He said he had seen and spoken to Miss Burge as she was sitting on the fence, saying she was waiting for a friend and they were going to Bognor. However, this was in the village of Strettington, 2 miles from Tangmere and in the opposite direction from Boxgrove. It now seemed that Marguerite Burge and Stanley Clark had set out to meet each other but had gone to different locations, and each supposed the other had stood them up. Marguerite had spent the next 30 minutes chatting until the man's buzz arrived at around 3:30. As inquiries were being made at the RAF camp, a thorough search was underway in the field where the body had been found, with some significant finds. Amongst the twigs and leaves and discarded bits of rubbish, officers found an army balaclava, a man's glove and a flathead screwdriver. They were all rushed to the Metropolitan Police Forensic Laboratory in London, where the human hair was found inside the balaclava and traces of blood on the other item. These findings reassured detectives they were looking for a soldier. As for a likely motive, with there being clear signs of a violent sexual assault, it was believed that Marguerite Burge had accepted the offer of a lift and had been killed after rejecting his sexual advances. It was thought the killer may have been stationed at RAF Tangmere, and Chief Inspector Barrett had a team of detectives interview all the men who were stationed at the camp that weekend. When this drew a blank, they spread the net wider. 3 miles north of Tangmere was Goodwood House, home to the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps. On Tuesday, February the 9th, Barrett and his team of detectives arrived at the camp to begin a mass interview of all the staff. As Canada had volunteered to join the Allied war effort, there were certain protocols that had to be followed, with each soldier interviewed in the presence of a Canadian military policeman. With a large number of the soldiers French Canadians, with most not speaking more than a few words of English, Barrett requested the assistance of Chief Inspector George Hatherill, a linguistics expert and fluent in French. To the surprise of the Scotland Yard detectives, they found that the Canadian military police at Goodwood had already been carrying out their own inquiries and had even identified a suspect. A sergeant in the Provost Corps told Barrett he believed a French-Canadian 23-year-old Private Charles Raymond had information about the case that could prove useful. He also said that Raymond drove a Chevrolet truck, had talked a lot about the murder and had named a fellow soldier who he believed was the killer. In the presence of the Canadian Provost, Sergeant Hatherill and Barrett interviewed Charles Raymond. He claimed that the murderer was a 31-year-old private, Arthur Patry. Patry, like Raymond, drove a Chevrolet truck, but that on its own wasn't really too much help, as detectives learned that scores of other soldiers based at Goodwood drove similar vehicles. Checking his movements on the Saturday afternoon, they discovered that at 1:45, Patry had been ordered to work in the motor pool and was with 2 other soldiers until 3:15. At 4:30 he reported to the Transport Administration Room, replacing the soldier in charge, and was on duty there until 7 o'clock. Patry denied any involvement in the crime, nor did he know Marguerite Burge. Plus, it seemed he had the perfect alibi. However, the murder site was little more than a 5-minute drive from his billet, and it was possible he could have slipped out unseen and been at Waterbeach at the time of the murder. Suspicions were not enough, and with DCI Barrett knowing he hadn't any significant evidence to arrest Patry at that stage, they left Goodwood House to pursue other lines of inquiry. Then, on Monday, February 24th, the Canadian Province Sergeant contacted them again with more startling information. Private Raymond now claimed that he and Patrick had actually seen the body on the Sunday morning before it was discovered at lunchtime. He claimed they had spotted it lying in the gap at the edge, and assuming it was a result of a road accident, both had decided not to become involved. Then, on returning to Goodwood House, Patrick told Raymond it was a body of a young waif and intimated he knew more about it than he was admitting. Patrick now turned on Raymond. He said that on the Monday morning after visiting church, Raymond had asked whether a fingerprint would be washed away by the rain. Staff at Goodwood were then asked about Raymond, and none could remember seeing him at all on Saturday afternoon in the camp. Another soldier claimed he was with Raymond in Chichester in his truck at just after 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. Although there was no fingerprint evidence, further investigations revealed that at 3:30 Raymond had bought petrol for his truck at a petrol station just half a mile from the field. Placed under arrest, Charles Raymond was asked to submit his clothing and a sample of his hair and to make a formal statement under caution. Under questioning, he now admitted he was in the area with his truck, but claimed he had seen Patrick driving his truck to pick up Miss Burge. He then claimed Patrick had dragged the young waif into the field and stabbed her with a screwdriver. He said that when he went to intervene, Patrick turned and threatened to kill him too. The revelation about the screwdriver was a fatal slip of the tongue, as up until that point there had been no mention of this being the murder weapon. The toolbox in Raymond's lorry was checked and the screwdriver was seen to be missing, although it had been present when the toolbox had been issued. Just such a weapon had been used on Marguerite, and one found near the lorry did show a positive reaction to human blood. Then, when Raymond's clothing came back from the laboratory, having revealed traces of blood the same group as Marguerite Burge, Barrett felt they had enough evidence against the Canadian to charge him with murder. On Monday, May the 10th, 1943, Charles Arthur Raymond appeared at the Old Bailey before Mr Justice Lawrence in a trial that was to last 5 days. The prosecution was led by Eric Neve, assisted by Mr John Maud, while the defence was led by Thomas Carthew KC. Raymond pleaded not guilty. Proceedings were slow, as for the benefit of the prisoner, all the evidence had to be translated into French. Opening the case for the Crown, Mr Neve said that the records at the petrol station showed that Raymond was in the vicinity at 3:30, as the prisoner had signed the petrol register, a requirement of wartime law. 10 minutes later, Raymond had offered Miss Burge a lift and had then carried out the murderous assault. Sir Bernard Spilsby outlined to the court the nature of the vicious attack on Miss Burge. He demonstrated using the dead woman's skull how the screwdriver was plunged 4 times into her head and 3 times into her breast, one of which had pierced her lung. However, Sir Bernard was of the opinion that the wounds had been inflicted after Miss Burge had been struck by a punch on the chin, which had rendered her unconscious. The pathologist also said that bruising on the back of the girl's head suggested this had been struck when she had fallen back in the cab. Sir Bernard then told the jury that he found slight bruising on the girl's hands and by her thighs, suggesting she had tried to fend off an unwanted sexual attack. In addition to telling the court about the blood group, he said there was also traces of lipstick on Raymond's clothes, which matched exactly the ones taken from the dead girl's lips. Raymond refuted this by saying he got the lipstick on his clothes after kissing a girl whilst the unit was on manoeuvres in Scotland. Suggesting a motive, Mr Neve said that Raymond had attacked and indecently assaulted Miss Burge after she had rejected his advances. In the witness box, Raymond stuck to his story that the real killer was Arthur Patrick, but her found in a balaclava was similar to Raymond's and totally dissimilar to Patrick's. On Friday, May the 14th, the jury retired for just under 20 minutes before finding Charles Raymond guilty of murder. The court interpreter was reduced to tears as he translated the death sentence into French. Raymond loudly protested his innocence as he was removed from the dock and taken below before being removed to Wandsworth prison for execution. Following the dismissal of his appeal on Monday, June the 22nd, Raymond made a confession in the condemned cell. He now admitted killing Marguerite Burge, but claimed it was an act of provocation on her part that had led him to hit her. Raymond said that he had known the victim for some time and that the girl would perform oral sex on him in his army truck. He said he had lost his temper following a row when he discovered she had been performing similar favours to other soldiers. He claimed he had punched her and she had died accidentally by falling and striking her head in the cab. He said he thought she was dead when he attacked her with the screwdriver, but could give no satisfactory answer as to why he had done this, nor why he had then sexually assaulted her. Detectives asked to investigate the claim found no evidence that Miss Burge was promiscuous. No other soldier testified as having any form of sexual relations with the dead woman, and they were highly suspicious of Raymond's admission of guilt. On Saturday, July the 10th, 1943, Charles Arthur Raymond was hanged at Wandsworth by Tom Pierpoint and his assistant Steve Wade. On the LPC4 form that records information on the drop, it was noted that Pierpoint was no longer alert physically and mentally to continue as a hangman. He would, however, continue as an executioner for another 3 years, but would only make one more visit to the South London prison before finally being pensioned off. Although Raymond's confession is undoubtedly false, inasmuch as he tried to besmirch the victim's name, suggesting she was promiscuous, there is no doubt he was guilty as charged, and fully deserving of his fate. The name of Charles Arthur Raymond is recorded on panel 25, column 1 of the War Memorial at Brookwood. He is among a dozen other spies and killers hanged during the war who have an unworthy place among those who heroically lost their lives in battle, not ignominiously at the end of the hangman's rope. You have been watching another tale from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.